Okay, we're recording. All right, so welcome back to BenThere. This is going to be a treat today, and it's been a minute since I've done one of these. So the intent when I first started doing this, I want to just be clear to the audience listening. This was just a COVID thing. It was just to kind of selfishly get me through COVID and kind of have a fun way to do that. And I talked about, if you've watched the show, if you listened to the show, this has always been, before I even finished, can you guys hear the candle burning? I forgot to ask you that prior to, okay, good. Because it's right next to my stuff. But I forgot to talk about the technicalities of this show. But but this was supposed to be just a show regarding third culture kids, people that grew up the same way I did. And it was, and I had a blast. And then about a year ago, the reason the show has been kind of off for a little while, just life kind of slapped me in the face. Those of you that know me know my mom passed away. That kind of stung for a while, and then it was just kind of getting back on track in life in general, and thinking I was a tough guy, thinking I could just, fight through some issues and deeper things and whatnot. And I did. And, by the grace of whatever power's up there, I've got an incredible wife who's stuck with me through the highs and lows and everything in between. And, but we're bringing this back. We're bringing back BenThere. And that's what this first episode is. And it's such a treat today because I can't wait to get into this. BenThere is switching formats a little bit. It's not going to be a weekly thing like I was able to do, but from time to time, I'm just going to invite people on to talk about life, talk about their backgrounds, talk about the highs and lows and just the humanistic side of everything, right? Because I think that's missing right now in today's world. That doesn't mean I'm going to go away completely from third culture kids because I do. Those are my people, and I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of talking to those people, but I do want to kind of widen, the span of who we talk to and why we talk to. And there couldn't be a better topic to get into this time around, this first time around. Today, we're going to discuss something that isn't always easy to talk about, especially with us guys. And that's why I have these two gentlemen on today. But we're going to talk about this epidemic, not COVID, actually. We'll probably talk about a little bit about COVID because I think that triggered some of this. But there's an epidemic that I know all too well and I can relate to literally because it's killing a lot of men out there. And I don't mean that sarcastic. I don't mean that lighthearted. There's this issue with mental health and the stigma with men in mental health that maybe COVID actually did trigger a lot of these emotions and feelings and thoughts. But there's this epidemic that men aren't supposed to, have feelings, and men aren't supposed to have issues, and we're just supposed to sweep our emotions and feelings under the rug, and we're not supposed to, have these mental health issues. And we all, so many people have them, but men, we're not supposed to talk about them. And the reason I have these two gentlemen on today is they've been brave enough to come on and talk about not only the conversation, the topic, but just their own experiences as well. And so without further ado, I before I get to you guys and introduce you guys, I do want to stress that none of the three of us are mental health experts. We're not doctors. We're not, psychologists in any way, shape, or form. We're three guys that feel that this is a topic that needs to be addressed. And without further ado, I want to welcome both Seth Louton and Seth Winterhalter to the show. Fellas, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's funny because you're both named Seth, so this might be a little tricky to kind of go back and forth. But I'm going to start with Seth Louton because he's been we just talked about this off air, Seth. You and I went to middle school overseas. We went to high school overseas together, and we battled each other on the basketball court. We, who would have thought our lives would still be crossing paths 30 years later, right? So we're very different in so many ways, and yet we're so similar in so many ways. And I really appreciate you being here. But if you don't mind, if you can just tell the people a little bit your quick bio and just kind of go from there.
Oh, sure thing, man. I'm what you say third culture kid. What it was called in my sphere way back in the 80s was missionary kid. So I'm the son of missionaries. I grew up in Taiwan with you. You had a mullet, I remember. and
They're coming back, by the way. It's brutal.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. So I was overseas in the '80s, early '90s. Came back for high school to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which was a very big cultural shift. Went a couple of years to high school, then went to Springfield, Missouri, where I went to college at Central Bible College. And during that whole time, there were so many things changing around me, just people in general, just how the world was. It went from being in a city of 6 million people to being in a town of 32,000 to like going to a college town where everyone is my age, and it was a lot. There were a lot of stresses, and uh, I'll be honest with you. Then is when I realized that I was not processing things the best. I wasn't, these things were happening. I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't know how to verbalize what was happening in my mind a lot of times. So sometimes I took extra risks. I was impulsive. I was loud. I was doing all, just being a kid kind of thing, trying to get attention, not knowing what to say. But made it through, got married. I celebrated my 25th wedding anniversary last
Wow.
year.
Congrats, man.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
She stuck by me through a lot more things that we potentially are going to talk about today. And I'm back here in Hot Springs. I totally understand. My mom did pass away a few years ago, so I'm here being close to my dad. And right now, I work in communications, and so hopefully, things are going to go okay. So
I
yeah.
appreciate that. Thanks for opening up, and I can't wait to talk to you more about it, because I think you and I, like I said, I think we're more similar than we are different. So even though we grew up somewhat similarly, but either way, I think I just appreciate you being here, man, and thanks for reaching out and doing this. So Seth Winterhalter, you knew Seth Louton. You and I have now known each other for about 10 minutes, but it's a good thing, man. I respect your story, and if you don't mind, if you can just kind of tell the people about you.
Yeah, I grew up in Washington State, farm boy, and ended up at Central Bible College with Seth. We share the same name and the same hair color, and he's kept the hair, and I've lost it all. So, yeah, this interesting dynamic, because we're talking about mental health, working through the deep things, and I think that my because of some childhood experiences, some might call it trauma. I think a lot of that creates then ruts and habits where we don't work through things. We don't know how to work through things. We don't see that happening, and it's interesting because it's interesting to see society over the last 2 decades has made a pretty radical shift. If you look back for how many generations was the quiet man, the man who doesn't speak, the man who holds everything in. I mean, we came right the World War II generation, right? They have 2 world wars, and they come out of that not speaking, right? How many of us have grandfathers who never spoke of their wartime experiences? Yeah. And that shifted over into the baby boomer generation, and I think into Gen X is what I guess they're calling me today, us today.
That's what the 3 of us are, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But now, over the last 2 generations, these people born in the 2000s, now it's like it's a highlight. It's a medal to share all these deep things. And so we'll probably look at that today. And what is there really health happening, though? Are we really being honest with the deep things, or are we still just doing the same thing and either holding back or not, or saying things that really still aren't true? They just look culturally popular. So that was kind of my, going back to my story, is I don't think I learned, because it wasn't modeled for me, and I wasn't in an environment to really share and work through the deep things. It was I've been a performer my whole life. I've been on stage my whole life. And so what is displayed externally has been much more the priority in my life. And so it's taken the last 2 decades for me to unpack a ton of stuff. And I've had some unique experiences. I've been in ministry. I've been a pastor, both music, executive, lead pastor for the last 20 years. And in fact, I just stepped out of ministry this last year. I was a part of Mars Hill Church, Mark Driscoll, national kind of chaos there. this last year was one of the toughest years of my life, just working through a lot of stuff mentally. Who am I? Who are the people around me? Why do I act the way I do? What pressures and obligations and expectations am I living out of? So it's been quite a journey, and looking forward to talking through it today and hopefully helping men and all people, but men specifically, because I think that we suck at being honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's not a win for us, right? We want men to thrive, and they're not going to thrive if they're hiding, and they're not going to thrive if they're faking it either when they do actually come out. When they do actually deal with the things that are deep within them, if they do it in the wrong intentions or do whatever culture tells you is popular, right? We don't want to be victims just to be victims. We want to actually work through things to find healing and find restoration, redemption, whatever that is that you need to find so you can live a purpose-filled life.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And you're so right in so many ways. And you kept going back to that victim thing. You know, as we both, all three of us share kind of our backgrounds and our stories here, I don't view myself as a victim because, I mean, there's definitely, you know, some guys out there and people out there that have had it way worse than me. And mine's, you know, we'll get to that in a second, but I just want to be very clear. I mean, you're right in the sense that the generation today, it's almost like it's cliche and cool to just throw out these terms of, you know, mental health and I'm a victim and all that. And I'm not belittling anyone. So when I say this, I want to be very clear in saying it. I'm not belittling anyone because every approach to this should be taken seriously until there's reason to maybe back off from it. But yeah, you're right. We're just a generation that's kind of lost and kind of caught in the middle of it because there's this, how we grew up. You're right. And you're so right. I grew up in a house. It was pretty open. I mean, for the day, I mean, we talked about stuff and things were that, you know, it was okay to kind of express yourself. Yet when I came back to the States, I lived in, and I'm just going to jump right into it. By the way, those of you that are listening, those of you who are watching, this is not scripted. This is just three guys having a conversation. So, I mean, I just want to be very clear about that. But I'll just kind of take lead on this for a second. But when I came back, I didn't expect to kind of go into this funk when I came back to college. I was like an American kid living overseas, proud of it, loved my life. Seth, you can relate to this. There were so many things that were just such blessings to me. Like I interacted with different cultures. I got to meet people from different countries and backgrounds other than mine. And it was so exciting and something that I spent 10 years doing. I didn't know any other way. And yet there was that always, you know, always part of me that I knew I was going to end up back in the States. The transition that I expected kind of just slapped me in the face because here I was finally, you know, not finally, that's the wrong choice of words, but just the fact that I came back to the States and now all of a sudden from going 10 years of my life, not necessarily looking like everyone else. I mean, I'm 6'2", you know, Seth, you can relate, you're a tall guy too, but it's just like you stood out definitely, especially in Asia. You know, I had reddish hair too. Back when I'm with you, Seth, Winterhalter. Mine, I still have some, but it's going quickly. So, but my point is, I looked a certain way, and I kind of thrived on that. I almost stood out. In my opinion, it was a good thing that I stood out. Then I came back to the States, and I didn't stand out anymore. Everybody looked like me, and from thinking for so long that's what I wanted, and then being complicated in this deep kind of emotional transition of like imposter syndrome almost. You know, I don't, you know, want to use that term lightly, but it was like I looked the part, I acted the part, tried to act the part. I thought I fit in, but intrinsically I was so lost. And I think that's something that's carried over even as an adult. And I'm kind of hogging the microphone right now because I'm just going to get my stuff out. Then I want you guys to talk. But this is something that's been intrinsically branded in me almost because nothing that anybody here in the States did. It was just, I didn't know how to act. And I kept thinking of myself as an imposter, not only in the States, but then I would go back overseas for Christmas times and summer times and see my parents. And then I didn't feel like I fit in there. So there was this misunderstanding intrinsically in my brain that just kept triggering and triggering and triggering. I didn't know how to act around people. I could put up a front. I could act a certain way, thinking that that's what they wanted. But all that did was bury what was really going on, right? It was sweeping it under a mat, and I wasn't openly expressing it. And then what happens is you just continue to fall further and further into that dark place. And I think losing both my parents definitely triggered that. But that imposter syndrome to me has been my biggest struggle, still to this day. You know, even on here talking to you guys today. There's this symptom of who I think I am versus who I maybe express to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough. And I do think these are the conversations that need to be had. I'm not wanting any sympathy. I'm not wanting any people to feel sorry for me, because I know there's people that have it way worse off than me, and both Seths, we'll get into your stories in a second, but yeah, jumping right into it. This is just such a topic that needs to be addressed. And it wasn't until Seth Louton. Seth, you mind? I printed out your message. You mind if I read this?
Go for it.
And the reason I want to read it, it's not, it's just finally someone, in my opinion, when I read this that day, and Seth, I think I wrote you right away. Like I think you posted this, and within 10 minutes I wrote you like, somebody gets this, But Seth, let's see, it was June. I think it was June when you posted this, if I remember right, or maybe early July. But it said, was talking with Ella Louton, which is your wife, about our generation thought of when we heard the term mental health. This picture basically sums it up. And it was a picture of the cast of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But now that we are older, we see a lot of hurt in the world. And I personally have a hard time wrapping my head around it. My own struggles included. Many men my age are struggling and have hard time asking for help, which is totally true. And I can't wait to talk about that. Men also have a hard time accepting help, but this doesn't have to be the case. Fellas, you do hard things every day. I love this, by the way, Seth. You do hard things every day. So do one more hard thing and reach out, or take that help that is being offered to you. Trust me, I know it's hard. I still have trouble asking for help, but I can honestly say that the help I've received has saved me from, sorry, it's dark in my room, so I'm having a hard time reading this. Saved me from myself more than once. I couldn't agree more. We have this stigma, and that's what this show's about today. And I want to dive deep through your personal connections too. But there's this stigma that this time period, us guys that grew up in those houses where you didn't, you weren't supposed to show emotion. You were supposed to be tough all the time. You were considered soft if you did. We grew up keeping all that in. I think I talked about this before we went live, but it's just that volcano of emotions that something is not right. We're going through an epidemic of men. The statistics show 150 million men in this country. 6 million of us struggle with mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say we're all off the deep end and we can't function day in and day out. That's not saying that at all. I think it's more what the three of us are talking about, that we are functioning, but we're not content. There's something driving us to reach out, and yet we're afraid to because of this stigma. Seth, we do go through hard things. As men, we do go through hard things, and we've reached out in maybe other aspects and avenues, and yet we're so scared of what people may think when we term that mental health, aspect of life. I'm just curious if you guys don't mind sharing your personal connections. I mean, I want to be open. I want this conversation to be open. I am going to be quiet now because I've hogged the mic for a little bit, but I sincerely just, when you guys hear that term mental health, if you don't mind sharing your own personal experiences as much as you want, there's no harm in kind of backing off here, but just, what is your experience of this? Why is this building up, or why maybe has that been building up for you guys too?
Well, I might say something right before. I want to hear Seth share more in depth, but I would say to your quote, it just jumps out at me, right? That 150 million men in America, is that what it was?
Yeah, this is just stateside. That's not even globally. Yeah,
so stateside, 150 men, and it says 6 million, right? Mm-hmm. So does that mean that 144 million are lying? Because let's be honest, a human, what sets apart a human versus any other species, right? This capacity for mental, right? Our minds. There's something happening in our minds, and as we continue to develop and evolve, and like what sets us apart is that functioning mind to process. And the difference is it processes what? It processes emotions, right? Mm-hmm. Think about what we hear. You got to find your passion. You got to find your purpose. That's emotional language. That is not logical language. Yeah. That's emotional language. And the more humanity thrives, meaning the more it creatively thinks and functions so that it can develop, right? Think about Like, again, you grew up in Taiwan, which again is a developed country, right? But you come back to America and like, there's just so much comfort, so much convenience, so much that you don't have to worry anymore. Think about this. For the last 100 years, since the 1900s, in America at least, like before that, most people just focused on trying to eat and survive, right? They're not thinking about vacations. No one even knows that term, vacation. And all of a sudden now, 100 years later, like we do not have any connection to that world. Like it makes no sense. To us to think about someone who lived in 1876, we might as well think of, 500 BC. Like a cowboy in 1876 is the same as a Spartan warrior in 500 BC. And so in their lives have way more in common than our lives today. And anyway, just to frame the conversation to help us, because there might be some guys going, well, 150 million, 6 million, I'm not a part of that.
It's about 5%. Yeah. But I agree with you. I don't think everybody's openly honest.
Yeah. I think and again, there's a scale, right? But I think to just set the frame so anyone listening to this just goes, wait a minute, I don't need to be clinically, mentally, diagnosed to go, wait a minute, am I actually processing? Am I being honest with my mental health and my mental foundation, my stability, so that I can function and thrive? Because you're a mental being. And if you don't actually work through how to think and how to function and how to work through emotions and how to think through what makes you a unique species, I think that you're going to spend more time hurting than you are thriving. And I think that's what we're trying to do today. So anyway, I just thought I'd set that up to help someone. It helps me think that's right. Because I think the first thing I want to do is ignore any real deep work, right? I got better things to do. And so, well, no, wait, man, this is important. And this is you. We're speaking to the choir here. So
yeah. And I think you're right. Everyone is going through these types of things, or men, how they process them is kind of unique. We do it different than women do. What my issue was, and what I realized my issue was much later, was that I would have all these different emotions that I was trying to process, and all these things that were causing me to struggle, but I only knew one way to express it, and that was to express it with anger. That was my default. If I was afraid, I'd become angry. If I was confused, I'd become angry. All that type of thing. I just was angry. And I was angry all the time, or at least that's what I would say. Looking back on it now, I realize, no, I was going through a myriad of emotions. I just didn't know how to process it and communicate it, because everything looked like anger to me. And it was really, really difficult. I began to do what every other man does. You either work it out, or you put your head down and you focus on something else. We're all kind of cubicle, and we kind of obsess over one little thing, try to ignore it, don't try to address it, all that. And it can go on for years. For me, it went on for years. I had some unresolved issues, well, I keep saying issues. Let's just call it what it is. I had some unresolved trauma. Okay. And trauma is a word that gets thrown out on TikTok a whole lot. And I don't think a whole lot of people know what trauma really is. And I don't want to just make it sound like something else. It's like, oh yeah, I got trauma. Oh yeah, I got pepperoni on my pizza. It is something bad, and it is something that happens to people. And so I had this unresolved trauma, and I didn't understand it, and it went on for years and years. And then finally, it just came for me to a point where everything broke. All my other types of coping mechanisms just would not work. Focusing on work, focusing on anything else, trying to shove everything down. My ability to communicate with my friends, my family, my wife, everything like that started to stop. I became more and more isolated. I became more and more distracted. My sleep patterns got eradicated. They were just all over the place. There were nights that I couldn't sleep at all, and there were days that's the only thing I could do. And I fell into what is a legitimate depression. Like, it was affecting eating everything, and I was just depressed. And it took having other friends that were depressed actually to say, hey bud, I think you're depressed, and talk to me about it before I would even like get to a point to be like, I think you're right, where I might have to go talk to somebody about this. I might have to kind of work something else like that out like that. And it was really difficult also because not only are we Gen X and we get like looked over a lot and all the culture war things, we just kind of keep our head down and go to work, right? But I grew up, and I would say I grew up in a loving home, but I grew up where there were certain times that you express certain emotions, and you can never be angry. You can never be sad. You got to be tough. You got to pull it together. I remember I cried when a guy scored a goal on me in soccer when it was the Y thing before they built TAS over there, Ben. And
TYPA. Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go. You're welcome.
I almost said YMCA, but I was like, that's not. But yeah, and my dad, he was a coach at the time. He wasn't having it, and I understand it. I get it. There's things like that, but you hear it often enough, you don't learn when you can have these emotions and how to express these other emotions. And so it was a rough time, and it's still something that I struggle with. It's still something that I have to go through and learn how to cope and to get through. And I think it's going to be other Seth's turn to talk now.
Well, I think there's some good things there you just said, like the walling off of emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of men, especially even now, like stoicism is making a huge comeback. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what stoicism is. Stoicism is controlling the emotions and not having emotions. But that's not a stoicism. Stoicism is about actually pressing into the initial emotion, actually experiencing it, and then going, okay, now what's real? Like that emotion is real, and my initial reaction to it, but now I'm not going to let that emotion dominate me. What do I need to do to actually work through that? And I think that's what we're saying today is both of those things aren't happening. Men aren't feeling the initial emotion of whether that's joy or pain or sadness or despair and going, I can feel that. I can have that. That's a vital reaction to whatever's going on in my life, right? Ben, you mentioned your mom passing away. You should have a emotional reaction to that. And that should be accepted and applauded. But then you should also go, okay, this has happened and I've had this emotional reaction. And so now what? Now what can how do I process this? What can I learn from this? How do I not just move on, like I need to move away from this, but how do I live in light of this now, right? Those are the conversations we need to have. And that's a true, not that I'm fanning the flame of stoicism, although I am a fan, but I think that's what's not happening, right? We're not able to both express the emotion and then logically to go, okay, how do I live in light of this? Not just how do I suppress this and move on and act like I'm over it. And so, like you say, coping mechanisms. Men are the key. We just bury our head and get to work. And how much? And that was my story. I had 20 years of just things that happened. Some of them were blips, and some of them were volcanoes. And I just put my head down and said, "Okay, let's go, until finally, all of that, the emotional stuff I think of that I had suppressed finally just said, okay, like you can't do this anymore. Like you have worth and value, you have identity, you have things that have been so scarred and marred by other people that you've just suppressed. Now they're overwhelming. Now it's like, why do I even, why? And I think one of the things too we have to be careful of, and again, I don't want to, I'm not here to poop on whatever, right? The church or whatever. What you see is, it's in all these things. We have to be careful when we're a part of organizations that stress so much on the external, right? And that can happen in a religious environment where it's all about like you said, you can't be sad. You got to be happy. You got to be joyful. We got to put on our Christian face. It's the same thing in the country club, right? You got to put on that rich face, like life is good. So it happens in all aspects of secular, sacred, wherever. But it's this external that has nothing to do with reality. Instead, it makes us not deal with what's going on. So what? We can perform for the Joneses? Like, what are we doing here? So anyway, I think, being mindful of coping mechanisms, being mindful of where even that word tough is all an external, it's an external image instead of working through and going, well, what needs to be tough? What do we mean by that? So anyway, just some thoughts.
Yeah. And let me just chime in real quick. I think both of you kind of hinted at this, and I know, Seth, that you brought it up too, but it's the communication thing. That was always the issue with me. I had a hard time, and still to this day, it's not just about growing up overseas. I want to be clear on that. I mean, it was just my biggest issues there. Seth, you mentioned trauma, and I can relate to that. And then grief too. And I don't just mean it losing both my parents, it's not just about that. But I'm just saying the grief of the life that I knew, transitional things, I didn't handle well. And I buried things under the rug, and I still do that, communicating those issues that I had, that here I was thinking I was the only one going through it. All that did was push it more under the rug until I realized this isn't just a me thing. This is going on, and being able to communicate those things. I'll tip my hat to my wife because she's allowed me to just speak freely, highs and lows and anger and whatnot. Seth, you mentioned this, the anger thing. I'm a pretty mellow person, outside looking in, but intrinsically, there's always that active volcano. Not that I go crazy or anything like that, but there's just always that sense of like fear and anger and emotions and grief all bottled up into the same thing. And I think that you're right. We were this Generation X thing, we are kind of lost in that little translation thing, in transition thing, because we were part of that group that was expected to just roll with it, right? Get over it, toughen up, rub some dirt on it, right? And I'm not saying that belittles us to like just completely open up and, hugely express our emotions, because I do think the stigma associated with being soft, if you do, right? You're not being manly enough. You're not, these conversations, just shut up and move on, right? Be a man, be a boy, toughen up, rub some dirt on it. Yeah, Seth, I can relate to that too. I mean, I grew up, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I grew up in a unloving, unwelcoming house, because I didn't. My parents were for that time frame, they were probably more open than most. But there's also the chemical side of this, the humanistic side of this, the biological side of this. We do, low testosterone as we start to age as men. Even in our 30s and 40s, our testosterone levels go down. And when that happens, the spike in mental health issues goes up. And the same thing with women too, by the way. The only difference is the women can usually channel their emotions a little bit better than we can, because we have been programmed to be this tough. Don't talk about it. Don't admit it. Don't tell your buddies. God, no way. Don't tell your buddies about it, because, the irony is most of them, like you said, Seth, they're probably going through it too. They just haven't admitted it yet. But yeah, I think getting back to what I was talking about though, is just the communication aspect of it. If I would like anything to change, it's being free to open up and talk to someone, whether it's a professional counselor or just a buddy. I think we just need to be there for our brothers, right? I think that's something that's been kind of pushed under the rug, and knowing that. And again, I tip my hat to you, Seth, because I've talked about this to my wife. I've had conversations with minimal friends, because even me, I still fear the backlash of, oh wow, what's wrong with him? Is he that's not the case. It's just a human side of things that I want to make sure that gets played out more than anything. So yeah, anyway, that's my take on it too. But the communication thing is just you're not soft, you're not weak. In fact, getting back to Seth's original conversation, we all go through hard things. This is just one more. It's called being human, right?
Right.
So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any take on that too, but it's that's kind of my 2 cents.
No, I got. I remember 2 distinct conversations I was having with some buddies, and and it was just, pretty much just joshing, going back and forth, catching up. How are things? This, that, and the other, and um, and it happened 2 times. These are 2 completely different individuals. They've never met. They're, the only common denominator is that they're both men and they both are my friends. And after we're just like joking around and doing things like that, uh, they each, and this was like years apart, they each made a joke about their mental health and about how severe it was, and about horrible consequences that they were thinking about because of their mental health, and they were just making a joke about it. However, that's how we as men have learned to talk about this type of thing, is we try to make it a joke, or we try to dismiss it, or we do those different types of things. And really, it's a lot of guys that are crying out for a little bit of help. I mean, one thing about male suicide, man, is men are more impulsive than women. So when it gets to like, when you're down like that, men will impulsively do things more than women will do them. And it's why there are so many men in our country that die from suicide. And I think we as men, not only do we need to start talking more, but we also need to pay a little bit more attention, because we'll be able to pick up on somebody who's starting to say something. And we got to start, listening to what some of these guys are saying. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to look pretty and everything. It's not going to make a good video for social media. It's not going to be anything like that. It's like you and your buddy sitting on your tailgate while you're like watching the sunset, just talking about what's going on in their life, or it's going out to get something to eat, or for, like where I live in Arkansas right now. So it's like us going to the gun range or something like that, where you're just doing guy stuff with a guy and having a chance to like just talk with him. But yeah, man, guys are crying out for some help. They need some help. They really do.
I think too, we have to be mindful of our habits, like you just said. Like guys tend to, when they get together, do right. Let's go shoot. Let's go golf. Let's do an activity, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But do you have time to actually talk? Do you have time to actually share? What's his name? Brian. Is a comedian. I can't remember his name. He has this act where he talks about his friend is getting divorced, and his wife asks him, oh, did you talk to, Tim about his divorce? And he's like, no. And he's like, you went golfing for 4 hours. You didn't talk to him? Yeah. He's like, what are you talking about? You're 400 yards away. How's your divorce? Like, that's the thing. We kind of distract ourselves, and then that's what we do. Seth, you made a good point. We kind of laugh it off. And why do we do that? It's because we've waited too long. That's a sign that we've spent too much time on the on-ramp of processing and working things out. We didn't communicate. And so now it's probably deep. And now the issue is there's shame there. So the only way we can kind of talk about it is through a joke. And even then, lighthearted. And if someone pushed back on us, we'd probably be like, "Oh no, I'm just kidding, man. I'm not."
Right.
We'd even be afraid to admit, even after saying something. So I think we have to be careful as men, because that's where when we were raised up, that language again, be tough. What is that? Well, it's shame. Like you're ashamed that a dad's ashamed of his son for crying and looking weak, so he tells him to be tough. And sure, maybe in some situations that might be appropriate, but we have to just think. I think those are more trained, like they're caught trained. Like I think most dads, they're trying to, make men, but we're not thinking about. We're making external men, and that's having a consequence. Then is men are driven by shame much more than women, right? When women get together too, they often. Right, even the way they, my wife used to play bunco. Right, bunco is basically anyone can play this game. It's more about talking. You're just doing something while you're talking. So when do guys do that? Even when we go to the bar, we're going to watch the game. We're not probably going to talk. We're going to talk lightly. So we got to have to look at our rhythms and say, are we having a spot where on some kind of regular basis we're able to be available for one another and to really open up And don't wait until you're a catastrophe. Just practice, right? Get in a rhythm of practicing. Yeah, how am I doing? Am I being honest with my emotions? This is what's frustrating. This is what's hard. Doesn't mean you're having a breakdown. It means that I'm practicing communication, and men suck at communication. So
100%.
Yeah. How do we get better at transparency and honesty and just talking, right? You see this even in, I've done how many marriage counseling sessions where the guy just wants to fix it. Just give me an action to fix. And the gal just wants conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with men, how do we actually start to communicate what we feel? Man, that's a whole loaded statement right there, because we can't even articulate because we've never put words to how we feel.
Well, we also just assume that we can fix it on our own, right? We don't need outside help. We don't need our boys. And the funny thing is, as you were talking about that, I was looking through some of these notes that I took, but this will play right into that. There's a quote that says, a lot of men fall prey to the false idea that they should be tough enough to fix all their problems on their own. They worry that by showing vulnerability, even in the case of physical illness, they may lose their authority with others. As a result, they may believe they can fix this problem quickly and move on to the next, and they may be in denial that there is a problem at all, right? And that's exactly what we were just hinting at. So we're so programmed sometimes to just sweep it under the rug, don't talk about it, it'll work itself out. But that's not how it always goes. And I do want to be clear in stressing too, this isn't every guy. I mean, but I do think, I know plenty of buddies of mine that are happy-go-lucky, and that's just who they are. It's not that they're hiding anything. Luckily, they just were blessed enough to not have to deal with some certain things, or they've been able to find a way to channel their stuff. And yet, I got to be honest, the majority of my buddies too, I still think, Seth, you're exactly right. We get around each other. All we want to do is just have a good time. We don't want to talk about, woe is me. We don't want to go there. We just want to have a good time. And that's helpful to a fault, right? Because I do think it's important to just sometimes hang and just be, and not, I don't want to say deal, that's the wrong term, but not have these conversations, because it doesn't have to be so sad all the time. I don't mean like, let's get around our buddies and just woe is me, everybody tell their story. But I do think there's a point, and Seth Winterhalter, I think you said this too, everybody's going through something, and at some point, at some time in their life, something's going to pop up or rise to the occasion, and it's how we deal with it. It's how we communicate it. And I do think as friends too, just my buddies, I've got buddies going through divorces. I've got buddies that are, have a medical issue right now, and money's tight and all that stuff. I mean, these are real problems, and they don't want to go to their wives. But at the same time, they don't really want to talk about it. They just want to have a good time as well. But that's kind of, it's not fixing anything. It's not solving the problem, but even just allowing ourselves to be there for other guys, it doesn't, it doesn't take away from us being that male figure. It doesn't reduce our sense of maleness, so to speak. Right. And I think that's what gets so swept under the rug too. We're so fearful, like this quote says, of losing our authority with others, because we have to be in charge, right? We're programmed to be like the men of the house, right? We're programmed to be the big brother, or we're programmed in so many different ways that we forget that it's okay to reach out at times too.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's not easy to do that, because it's difficult to be vulnerable. If I were to ask you like right now, who's that one person that you're going to call? I mean, I'm sure that there's one person that you've got in your mind, but I know that you're like, but I really don't want to call them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Well, even my wife, it takes everything in me to express things to her, because I don't want her thinking that I'm just nothing but an emotional catastrophe, right? And yet it's a very real emotion, but there's that stigma of I've got to be on it. I've got to be, I've got to have everything in control. And she's not stupid, and buddies aren't stupid, like you said. I mean, people can figure you out pretty quick, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, but what just to show the difference between men and women, especially when Lisa is like asking me a question, she can tell something's up, right? Because these are still things that I deal with, and I deal with them every day. I've got to try to cope with them and get through it. And she'll ask me a question, I'll do my best to answer it, and then she'll want me to open up more or something else like that. And there are some times where I'm like, I don't have any more words to explain what I'm going through. I'm just having a bad day, And sometimes it's a little bit biting. Sometimes, it's like I've got to work on a better way to like do that. But for us, just being able to express it the way that we express it, having that freedom to be like, this is what's going on, and just like leave it there, is a little bit freeing. It's like setting down a burden, if we want to use, more like religious text. It's like setting down a burden or having someone else pick up your burden for you, and I think that as we move through and we have these different relationships, whether it's, with your partner or with its friend or whatever it is, having that person that you can speak to is like really important, especially when they know you well enough that you guys can be like watching a game or you can be doing whatever, and then your friend is going to be the one that comes up to you and says, hey, how are you doing with this? And maybe we got to be that friend to somebody and like be a little bit more intrusive in their lives just a little bit, even if it's just talking for like 2 minutes, just do something like that. But again, not a medical professional. So.
Well, I think what you say there too is good for men. Men need to. You said this earlier. Men are going to fix. We are naturally wired to fix, and I think when it comes to these kind of conversations, we have to dial that back. We have to learn what it means to just have empathy. I just my story this last year, really hard year for a number of reasons, and I had a couple guys, probably the guys closest to me, tried to fix instead of listen, and it made things 10 times worse. And so if you're a guy and that's happened, that's one of the hardest things, where you're trying to be vulnerable, you're trying to open up, and guys are not listening with the right set of ears. They're listening to, okay, well, how do I give you information? And oftentimes when we try to fix things, we fix things according to what has either worked for us or what we think would work for us. And we can jump the gun and not really listen with intentionality. And I think that's what happened. I just felt like I felt not listened to. I felt not cared for. It drove me into even darker depression, because then I felt all alone, right? That I was just kind of a burden to someone. So I would just, so I just say that because I'm learning, right? I'm learning, and I know I've done it. I know I've done that same thing where someone's come to me for counsel, and it's been easier to give them a solution than just to sit with them and to sympathize and to empathize and go, man, that's hard. I can see how that's hard, and maybe let's just sit there. And maybe I don't need to give any advice. Maybe I don't need to give them a way to fix it. Maybe they just needed to know that someone would sit with them. So I think that's something too, just being careful. I just know for me, I want to fix everything. I'm a fixer, a functional savior, and those things have gotten me into more trouble. And especially, it was just eye-opening to then experience that for myself and to go, wow, that wasn't helpful. And it's helped me be more, I think, reflective on how I want to be a better friend, specifically to the guys around me.
Which actually leads me to my next kind of question. Where do we go from here then? I mean, you guys are both men of faith, and personally, I'm a little more spiritual. Doesn't mean we don't kind of view things the same way. It's just how our interpretation of that is. But you both are men of faith, and I'd like to hear how, in your opinion, how can we do better? Whether it's a faith-based, it's the right term, faith-based fix is. I don't want to use that term, but that's kind of what we're talking about. Or just how do you view this getting better? What can we do?
You go. No, you go. You're much smarter.
I was going to say Seth go, but that doesn't help either. So go ahead.
No, man. If I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. My favorite verse in the Bible is John 11:35, and it's just 2 words. It's Jesus wept. And this entire story in John chapter 11 is when one of his best friends dies. His friend Lazarus dies. And so he goes and And, you know, he was on the road and he hears that his friend died. And so he changes his plans and everybody moves on back and they're all going there. And he gets up and he's looking over the hill and he can hear everybody just going through all this emotion. They're going through all this grief. And that's what moves him with compassion to cry. And this is my perspective. You know, we have perceptions of Jesus as divine, but there was also the man that he was as well. Me being able to connect to that person as a man, having these emotions and these reactions to certain emotional things that were going on, because you look at it, he was angry, he was sad, he was happy, he was helpful, he was assertive, he was all these things, and it was in the physical world. If you just want to look at it that way, this is an example, at least to me, on how I can begin to wrestle with some of these issues. And for some of us, it's going to be how we talk with the therapist or with the counselor or with the pastor or someone like that. For others, they're going to need something a little bit more. They're going to need, you know, possibly some medication, or they're going to need, you know, a real doctor's help. Is not real doctor, but, you know, they're going to need a medical diagnosis for what they're going through. And moving forward, I think what you can do is do, like I said in the post, you do one more hard thing. And that one more hard thing is saying, hey, this is a problem that I got, and I've got to find some way to get some help. So, you know, whoever listens or watches, or, you know, if they haven't shut it off by now, you know, you've got a friend, you've got some way to get some help. You really do. And I think you mentioned about linking things like different helps and stuff, maybe.
Yeah, I will. I'll put some. I think there's a chat part on this, and that I could add that too. So yeah, keep talking though.
Yeah. So that's what I would say needs to happen. But it's not going to happen for you. You're going to have people that are going to try to like move you around. But for me, I didn't begin to improve in my own mental health and with the depression that I was going through until I hit rock bottom and I had to personally make that first move myself. And
if you don't mind me asking, Seth, because I do come from a little bit different world. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic house, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm not a believer, so to speak. But the older I've gotten, I've kind of leaned more towards the spiritual side of things. So that's why I want to make sure. I think the cool thing about this conversation is that the three of us are so similar in a lot of ways, but we're different in a lot of ways. We kind of bring, you know, that channel of people that, you know, we connect with our friends and whatnot. How is, I got to ask this the right way, how is therapy received and perceived in that religious climate or culture? Because I mean, growing up, it was never really talked about. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've never gone to counseling. I absolutely have. And I was scared to death to do it. And yet it's not only been good for me personally, but it's driven me to realize that I can help others. We've talked about this before we came on. This isn't to toot my own horn, but it's been had such a lasting effect with me that I'm actually getting another master's in that, clinical mental health counseling, and I should be done soon. But I believe it's helpful just to vent to a non-biased party sometimes. You know, I think that's sincerely, and I never would have done that without the backing of my wife, who kind of, you know, talked to me about, I was against it. I was typical guy. Here we go again, right? Typical guy. No, I'm fine. I'll just go to the gym. I'll work out. I'll be fine. I'll go run an extra mile. I'll be fine. I'll do one more of whatever, but just no, I'm not going to open up, because that's not what guys do. Turns out that is what guys do, you know, and it turns out that is what we need. But in that religious culture that you both are a part of, how is that received and perceived in terms of getting counseling, professional help?
Not good.
Yeah.
Initially, church in the 80s, you know, there are certain elements of, you know, evangelicalism that don't want any type of medical help. It's not just like for counseling or anything, but as far as like doctors for physical issues and stuff like that. And there's this reliance on, or the idea is complete reliance on God to be sufficient for all of your stuff. So if you are seeking some sort of help from a counselor or a doctor, what it is it's showing your lack of faith.
Oh,
Now
wow. Okay.
that's an extreme position, and it's not held by a whole lot of people, so don't think that's all evangelical. But it's enough that the idea, because it's been a part of the subculture for so long, that it's seeped in at different levels throughout different Protestant churches. And so it makes it difficult for men, especially because you got these old dudes. Like there was a guy, he just passed away during COVID, not from COVID, but during COVID. And he had the roughest hands I ever had, but he was like missing his thumb because he got it caught. He was a farmer and, doing that kind of thing. And he would always tell the story, when my thumb popped off, I just kind of wrapped it up and I kept like mending the fence until the end of the day. I never went to a doctor. My great grandma has a story about how she gave birth while she was sharecropping and then went back to sharecropping, leaving the baby with, her other children and stuff like that. And, it's like nobody needs any kind of help. And, some of it is like church culture, some of it is Southern culture, but it's counseling in particular has not been received well. It's starting to change, I would say. Seth, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's starting to change, but yes, it's not just in any organization, right? I mean, just think about men in general. We get made fun of because we won't ask for directions. We won't ask for help, right? So we'll be lost for 4 hours on the way to some road trip. So it just comes back to whether, yes, there are going to be things that you have got to think about culturally, and whatever your culture is, secular, sacred, that will influence you without you being mindful of their influence to not get the help you need, or whether that's, again, therapy or counseling or just speaking to a friend, right? There's all kinds of things that you've got to say. What is this a truth? Am I feeling an expectation or a false belief, a distorted belief that's just baloney in my head that I just need to say that's what that is and actually be? So yeah, I think we need to do a better job. I am nervous too, and maybe just to speak to some of the younger men who might listen to this, because you've got TikTok and you got a lot of things, social media platforms that are talking a lot about mental health, and some of it's good and some of it's not good at all.
Right.
Everyone's a narcissist. Everyone's this. So it's everyone's evil and everyone's good, right? The evil people is everyone but you, and you're the ultimate victim who's experienced the ultimate trauma. But it doesn't really tell you what to do. It just tells you almost to sit in that and to sit in your victimhood and then to see everyone else as evil. And that's not going to help you either, right? You need to actually work through what have you experienced, and don't just call it don't see it as I don't want to trick it like this. Like you said before, it doesn't really matter if it's trauma or if it's not trauma. It's what's happened to you, and that's important enough, right? I think even that's why we feel like bad using the word, because it's like, well, is it really trauma? And that person's that person's look like they've really experienced trauma, so I want to make sure they get help. So I'm not going to get help. Well, that's not healthy, right? We don't need to compare our trauma or our victimhood to anyone else. What you need to do is work through it. And so I think, just having a better mentality, no matter where you are, right? There's going to be a side of us who want to just bury it down because it's not that big of a deal. And now it seems like there's going to be a generation who wants to almost make it more than what it is, because the bigger your victimhood, the bigger your trauma, the more, again, it's just external. The more people will go, ooh, let's feel bad for them, the more attention you get. And that's not going to help you work through it either, because you're not being honest. Yeah. So if we can just be transparent and honest, and also I would say this is where it's less, and maybe a mental health professional will correct me. I'm going to assume, and I'm going to think, just because of my own experience and because I've been counseling for 2 decades, it's less about what even really happened, and it's more about how are you processing through it today. Because again, every day is a little different, right? Like you say, we lose a loved one. someday I might feel joy. Someday I might feel sadness. Someday I might be pissed off. Like those are all viable emotions. And what you can't do is go, I worked through it once, so now I'm good.
Yeah.
No, that's not the human existence. Yeah. That's not human life. And so you have to have permission to be able to go, I can work through things. I can do one aspect of counseling and therapy, which is to get to the bottom and be honest with it. But then you also have to live with it day to day. And sometimes you might go years without it rearing its head. And some days all of a sudden it hits, and now it's, again, who knows? And so I would be careful too for someone who goes, well, I thought I worked through this, so why is it? Well, maybe you had some other experience that triggered something, that brought something up, that maybe you didn't look at it in this angle. So I think we just need to have a lot of grace. That's a word I'll use, right, from my religious experience. I think that too many both religious and unreligious people don't give people enough grace. And it's like, well, let's just fix it and be done with it, or let's just ignore it and move on from it. And it's like, how about we just give each other grace to create an environment where we just want to care for one another, and we want to celebrate what's good, and we want to just sit with people with where they're at, encouraging them to not stay put, but to be able to do something, right? And that doesn't mean just a project, but what are we like? It's okay to be sad. It's okay. It's okay to be depressed. It's just not okay to sit in it and wallow in it and let that emotion overcome you continually, right? It may overcome you for a moment, but I think if you're surrounded with people, if you're able to express that, I think it starts to lose its power over you. So I don't know, some things there.
Yeah, I like that. In just in my own background, in my own studies and whatnot. But yeah, grief and trauma, there's no blueprint for that. You know, everybody handles things differently. And I love what you said there. The grace thing is definitely true, and humility true. And just be a little more empathetic. I think that's what it comes down to. But that blueprint can go with mental health in general, right? Because you're right, there are going to be nine times out of 10, I'm fine. But there could be something that triggers me, and it's something silly that doesn't get cut off on the freeway. You know, somebody comes over and doesn't use their blinker. That could be a trigger, you know. Waiting in line longer than I usually, just silly things. But that's the point. Everybody handles things differently. And I do think we tend to forget that sometimes. It's like we almost have to have a blueprint for this, a blueprint for that. It's like we have to look up in a book, okay, how do we handle this? And that's not how this stuff works. Everybody's different. Everybody handles things differently. And that's okay, you know. But like you both have said, when things do go south, when the spirals start, when the triggers start to happen, you know, it all comes back to communication. It all comes back to not being fearful of reaching out based on how others may view you, because I think that's what holds us guys back more than anything. We're just so fearful of how we're going to be perceived. And it's silly because we started this entire conversation off talking about this. There's a good chance, you know, not saying everybody, but there's a good chance that most guys and people in general at some point in their life will experience some type of mental health crisis. Now, the level of crisis, it may range. But at the same time, there's still a crisis, and it's how we communicate, how we adapt, how we channel that is what I think needs to improve more than anything, and not be fearful of how we're going to be perceived.
Yeah. 100%. And guys need to know, especially middle-aged guys now and younger guys coming up, that your path is going to be disrupted. Just expect it, you know. And when your path gets disrupted, it's going to affect your purpose. And for men, like Seth was saying, purpose is incredibly important to us. It's one of our driving factors. It's why we wake up a lot of times. But you got to be ready for it. You got to know that you're going to take a hit sometimes. You just are.
Usually when you least expect it too, right?
That's
yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, because the three things, right? Death is all around us. Failure is all around us. And if you're not failing, then you're probably not striving to reach your potential and your purpose, which means you'll also fail, experience the failure of that. So you just can't live. I think it's impossible to live in this life without things that will play with your head.
Right.
And so the only options then is to ignore it and suppress it, or to let it overwhelm you and derail you. Those are the two options unhealthy. The proper way is to go, wow, like I was just, I want to create strong men, but strong men admit they're weak, right? I want to create mighty men, but mighty men admit they have to be meek in order to be mighty. I want to create men that are in control, but are in control of what they actually, right, have a capacity to have control over. They're not almighty, right? These are human beings, and a being is something that feels. They have to feel and experience life. And so, but we're created to experience that together, right? That's the unique thing too. The world is only growing with people, and you lose out on really life if you live in isolation and alone. I see more and more. I'm going to live in Montana, on a ranch by myself. Right? Like, have fun with that. Like you and the buffalo. But I don't, and I'm not saying I'm arguing for an urban existence. I'm just saying, like, relationships are what make life worth living, especially in a human existence. And I think that we're missing out. It just shows when we try to live in isolation, we obviously, those are the people who've actually had probably the most hurt, because it's too painful to have relationships. And so how do we work through that? And how do men become better at being honest and transparent and not feeling like we've got to be? That means that we've got to like sit around and paint each other's toenails and ball. What it does mean is just be honest, right? Yeah. If you're having a hard day, man, just be honest. And that's, we can come around you and go, man, get it, been there. And how do I just hear? And how do I know too, like you say, there are variables. There's hearing someone who's just having a hard day and just needs a pat on the back, say, man, we're here for you. Mm-hmm. And there's other times when it's like, man, I'm having a hard day. Is it a hard day or is it a hard life? It's a hard life, man. Everything's falling apart. Okay, let's get together and just sit down and talk a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, fellas, we're coming up on that time marker. I can't thank you enough for doing this, and I hope whoever's listening, like I said, I just hope it comes back to the fact that if there is an issue, talk to somebody, communicate. Everything we've said here today, I think, is meaningful and honest. If you need help, there's no harm, there's no embarrassment reaching out, even if it's just to a friend. Start that conversation. Mm-hmm. Because it could be just one simple conversation that could be literally, I'm not trying to, make light of this, but it could be the difference between life or death, for some cases, mm-hmm. the severity of the cases. Seth, I'm going to keep going back to, your quote of one more hard thing. That's what we do as people. That's what we do as men. This is just one more hard thing. And it's doable. It's getting through. It's communicating. It's everything we've discussed here today. Grace, other Seth. I keep going to your other Seth as far as this conversation goes. But the grace comment, yeah, I mean that it doesn't take a religious person to understand the meaning of grace, right? Mm-hmm. I think that it's a valuable word that can be taken in many different meanings, and I agree with you. 100% agree with you. The grace and just being more empathetic. I think it doesn't make us soft. It makes us human.
Right.
And I think that's what's missing. Politics aside, religion aside, everything you want to, any category you want to go to. I think right now we're in this world of we have to one up each other instead of being there and being a little more empathetic for each other. It doesn't make us soft. It makes us human. Mm-hmm. But fellas, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I hope this resonated with people out there, and even if it was just one person that watches this or listens to this that realizes, okay, they're not alone. I think we made a difference today. Mm-hmm. And it's not just us. There's a lot of conversations being had, but there's many more conversations that still need to be had on this topic. So if any of you out there are listening, I strongly encourage you to Google Kevin Love and his Everyone is Going Through Something. I guess it's an op-ed. But it's definitely worth a read, because I think that hits home on a lot of these things. And it's not just average folks like us. It's, there's, famous people go through things too. It's again, getting back to that humanistic nature of things. But I'm going to conclude here. But guys, thank you so much for doing this. And let's do this again, because it's not a one-shot deal. I don't think this is a conversation that has to end here. We can definitely touch again on things we missed and whatnot. But thank you so much for doing this, fellas. Anything else you guys want to add?
No, just thanks for having me on and letting me talk about the stuff, because I need to talk about it more, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same. It's been good.
Yeah, we all do. And that's the thing. I mean, here, again, before we even started, I mean, I've known you guys, and well, Seth, I knew you, and then the other Seth, I didn't really know you, but I feel like I know you now, man. I just appreciate your honesty, both of you, your transparency, and just keeping the conversation going, because these are the kind of conversations that need to be had.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, fellas, thank you for being part of season 3 of BenThere. This is episode 1. This will be posted, and along with that, I couldn't add any links or whatnot, but I'll do that when I go back and actually publicize this. I'll make sure there's links attached. But in terms of if you are needing help or needing some type of direction, I'll post a few links to that and for those that need that. But talk about it, guys. Communicate. Everybody out there, you know, there's no harm, there's no shame. Don't live in fear just because you're worried about how others perceive you. It's bigger than that. So people need you around. People need a conversation. So, guys, thank you so much. I'm gonna conclude it here. I'm gonna end the broadcast, but stick around. You two stick around on this, and we'll talk just a little bit more. But thanks again, and we will talk to you guys soon.